Everybody, good evening. Welcome to our webinar. We're excited to be here and be able to have Brian with us and to be able to talk about the weather and what's going on and what we can look forward to with the weather. It's been a little bit different summer here with the changing of the El Nino and everything, and so we're excited to be here and see what Brian has to say. Um, we just want to remind everybody that we have, this is the time for renewals for PRF, and so we just want to remind you that if you've got PRF, then hopefully your agents are going to be in contact with you soon, and we can start to look at getting coverage set up for next year. So just keep that in mind, and we'll start to head forward into that season. But once again, if you have any questions as Brian's going along, just please put them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. Brad is here to help us with the questions at the end. But we're excited to hear from Brian, so I will turn the time over to him now.
Right, great. Thanks, McKay. I'm going to share my desktop here and we will get going. And if you guys can't see everything, just please don't hesitate to let me know. Everybody see my desktop?
Looking good.
All right, great. Let's go ahead and get started. And first of all, I always like to take a look back at where we've been. And this is a short-term drought indicator. It's on the order of about 1 to 4 months. And basically what it tells you is simply where it's been raining, quote unquote, recently. We have some areas that have been blessed with some moisture, especially across western New Mexico, parts of southwest Colorado, down into Arizona, California. But really some of the wettest and most consistently wet areas have been confined up in the western part of the Corn Belt, Missouri Valley, Upper Great Lakes, and then also across east central and southeast Texas. There are other areas that have not been nearly as fortunate. The northern Front Range of Colorado, most of eastern Wyoming has been quite dry. Southwest Montana, you can see a lot of oranges and red on the board right there across parts of Oregon, Nevada, Utah, and down into northwest Arizona, and even down in the southeast New Mexico and southwest Texas. And I think the thing to really take away from this map is that in June, we saw a pretty robust push of monsoonal moisture that came up from the south and southwest. And that really helped to contribute to some wet times across a large part of New Mexico. But over the long haul, we have not had a really solid, sustained monsoon moisture push for an extended period of time. And if you followed us for the past several months, you know that I was worried about that trend not developing back in the late winter and early springtime. So it's kind of been a mixed bag, really, because this time of year, especially from late July through August, we should be seeing daily rounds of showers and storms pretty much every single day. And going forward, I'm kind of worried about that. The past 30 days, this takes us back to the middle part of July. You can see that there are some areas that have had moisture. There are other areas that have not, focused over the western part of the United States. We've got west central portions of Utah doing okay, northwest Arizona, but you also see areas in between these blues and greens that have been not nearly as fortunate. And again, I think that owes to the fact that during a typical monsoon season, we see that moisture spread out more uniformly instead of just hitting these certain pockets here and there. And really, for folks in eastern Colorado, we have not benefited much at all from significant monsoonal moisture. A lot of the storms that we've seen here has been actually from a moisture feed that's backed in from the east behind a cool front that moves through. So again, hopefully we can finish the season with a little bit better monsoon push than what we've seen, but I am not terribly optimistic about that over the next couple of weeks. That's what this map shows right here. This is the forecast rainfall anomalies for the next couple of weeks. And you can see that places in Arizona, New Mexico, large part of Colorado, even east and southeast Utah, you can go farther north across southern Montana and Wyoming that are actually going to be drier than average. And the culprit is really a large area of high pressure that's going to center itself over New Mexico and Texas. That's not only going to provide for some significant dryness, but also significant heat in that part of the world. And I want to break down the next 2 week period here in a couple of increments. This is the next 7 days. So this will take us through the 23rd, the morning of the 23rd. And you can see where these temperature anomalies are really focusing themselves. Across Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, even parts of southern Colorado are going to be on the order of 6 to as much as 13 degrees above average. This takes into account nighttime lows and daytime highs. So, from a vegetation standpoint, especially during the summer where you're dealing with heat, if you can't cool the atmosphere down in a normal fashion, like you can normally would at nighttime, and you're still staying warmer than average, that tends to take the vegetation and make it go backwards very quickly. And it doesn't matter what you're talking about in terms of vegetation. That's just how plant life works. So we're dealing with that over the next 7 days or so. Beyond that, taking us from the 23rd through the 30th, you could see that a little bit more of that heat tends to focus itself a little bit farther to the north and to the west. So, bottom line, I think for the majority of us in the Four Corners area over the next couple of weeks, we are going to wrap up August on a hotter than average note and likely on a drier than average note. That doesn't necessarily mean that there are not going to be showers and storms that happen, because I think in the mountains, especially in western Colorado, we'll get a push this upcoming weekend. But remember, this is a wet time of year historically. And if we're not continuing to see those showers and storms tick and do their work, it puts us behind the eight ball as we wrap up the monsoon season and we get ready to go into the fall season as well. So that's kind of a look at the next couple of weeks. Beyond that, a big player that you've probably heard me talk a lot about, and probably many other weather outlets, is what are we going to do this upcoming fall, winter, and spring season in regard to El Nino or La Nina? Well, we slipped out of El Nino last spring, and we've kind of been hovering around neutral. And I'll talk more about that in a second. The push as we move forward over the next couple of months is going to be to try to develop a La Nina episode. And this graphic simply puts out what is the prevailing weather patterns are with each particular thing. And El Nino favors the southern tier of the United States with wetter than average conditions. The La Nina typically favors the northern tier. So we kind of flip things around a little bit when we transition from one to the next. And whether or not we go full blown La Nina in the coming months, I think is somewhat irrelevant, because even if we tip the scale a little bit in that direction, there's probably still going to be some La Nina like impact over the south and southwest part of the United States. And I'll show you why here in just a moment. These are the sea surface temperature anomalies. And for us to even begin to think about going to La Nina, you need cooler than average water along the equator west of South America. So you could see the blue shading right there that extends out there along the equator in the west central or the east central Pacific. That's a step in the right direction. Now, that cooler than average water has not been all that robust and sustained up to this point, simply because we have not had a lot of a good easterly trade wind pushed. If you push those easterly trade winds blowing from east to west across the equator, it spreads out the warm water on top, and cool water has to upwell from beneath to replace it. So that tends to cool the surface, which is one of the first steps and one of the first dominoes into actually working our way toward a La Nina episode. So from a sea surface temperature anomaly standpoint, we are trying to move in that direction. However, we have to couple the atmosphere with the ocean in order for there to be an El Nino or a La Nina form. And the way our computer models are stacked right now through September, you can see none of them are that excited about pushing us into a La Nina episode by September. And again, I know September is not that far away, but you see right here, the NOAA models or our US government models are actually pushing us there during September. You see their little bar pushes us beyond the blue dashed line and into La Nina territory. It's the only one to do so. My favorites as far as El Nino or La Nina analysis are concerned is the BOM up there on the top. That's the Bureau of Meteorology out of Australia. Very good scientists. The ECMWF, that's the famous Euro model, if you will, from the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasting. Very good scientists, very good technology. And from my standpoint, if those two are not pushing us toward a La Nina episode by September, then I have a high level of skepticism that that's going to develop. Okay. I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm just saying we only have a handful of weeks here before that's going to materialize, and the atmosphere and the ocean are not talking like a La Nina should. So that's what it looks like for September. If we look at the forecast for November, again, look at the BOM and the ECMWF. There's maybe a little bit more of a push there. Other models are maybe pushing a little bit more in that direction. But by far, the most aggressive modeling and the most aggressive forecast, which some of that is human influenced at NOAA, is taking us toward a moderate La Nina episode by November. It is the only source that's doing that right now. Even the UKMO, that's the UK Met from Great Britain, even if it was to be a little bit aggressive, it would be barely reaching La Nina thresholds by that time. So you take the mean of all these, and we're still not having a forecast that takes us toward La Nina. And January's forecast, if you look at the BOM up there, it's right at neutral, right at zero. The Euro model is just the left of neutral. The NOAA model is about where it was, maybe a little bit weaker. Same thing for the UKMO. And the mean forecast is right there at around negative 0.5 in terms of the sea surface temperature anomalies out there in that ENSO region. So my takeaway from this is while we may be moving toward La Nina, we have quite a bit of work to do yet before we can actually say La Nina is here and La Nina is going to have a full-blown impact. Again, I'm not saying that that's not going to happen. I'm just saying that the deck is kind of stacked against it at this point to have a significant La Nina event. And you might ask the question, well, can't weak La Nina events have impacts? Absolutely, they certainly can. But the takeaway from me from this is that I don't want El Nino or La Nina. Okay, I want something that's neutral because when you get locked into La Nina or El Nino, you create these weather regimes where the wet stay wet and the dry stay dry, and your weather pattern variability goes down by quite a bit. If we keep things neutral here, it helps to increase weather pattern variability, and that helps to eliminate a lot of the giant nasty drought that a lot of times La Nina can provide us in the west and the southwest part of the United States. So this is not something that I just look at and don't look at again for another month or two. I'm looking at this stuff every single day for changes that might give me a little bit more breadcrumbs to kind of put things together about exactly what we're going to see. But right now, a big, nasty La Nina does not look that likely. A weak event, I think, is still on the table, and that weak event could still have impacts, as I'll show you here in just a second. Okay, so I think that's something that's really important because back in the spring and even the early part of the summer, we were steaming toward a La Nina episode, and then we kind of put on the brakes a little bit. And I think that that's been beneficial to some of us in the Western United States, although in some cases it's been far from ideal. I think it could have been a whole lot worse. So I think that's a point to take note of. September forecast from the Euro model here. Generally favoring drier than average conditions across the Four Corner states and the areas surrounding. And again, you can even go down into Mexico and you see the drier than average conditions down there. Again, I think that's a testament to the lack of the monsoonal pattern that we can sometimes see, not only for July and August, but it can also help bleed over at least into the first couple of weeks of September. And if we don't have that flow, those areas are likely going to be drier than average. As I say, it doesn't mean it's not going to rain at all. It just simply means that the odds of us being drier than average during September are greater than the odds of us being wetter than average. If we go to October, that dry signal lessens a little bit, kind of refocuses, but it's still prevalent across southern Utah, southern Nevada, southeast California, Arizona, New Mexico, still seeing some of that, and then spreading its way eastward toward Texas. I think something to watch for is if we're going to make a tip toward La Nina, even in just a week standpoint, a couple of things are going to happen. The Southwest will remain dry or drier than average, and the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rockies will start to turn on in terms of moisture during the fall season. So for the month of October, you see a little bit of a tip toward wetter than average in the Pacific Northwest, parts of southeast Montana and the Northern Plains. But if we go to November, that type of signal shows up even more, being wetter than average, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, western Montana. Again, no big, nasty dry signal being prevalent over the Southwest. There are some dry spots, but the core of the driest signal is farther east across the lower Mississippi and eastward into the Ohio Valley. Okay. I think that the the pattern still has variability in it. At that point, we're not locked into one particular phase. And this is kind of how it should look, because the Euro model was really not forecasting us going toward a La Nina. I think as we go to December, again, a lot of the Northwest and the West shows up being wetter than average during that time. We've got some dry stuff over Southeast Arizona, parts of Southern New Mexico, down into Mexico, Southwest Texas. Okay. Still problematic right there. But in terms of the dry signal encompassing a large part of the West, the Euro is not on board with that at all. In January, you see that La Nina-like signal is a little more prevalent, where we're dry from Southeast California, Arizona, parts of New Mexico, Southwest Texas, and still quite a bit wetter than average once you go in from Northern California, Pacific Northwest, and on up into the Northern Rockies. And I think we got February here as well. And again, nothing hugely scary, even though we might end up the tip here on the Euro model is to dry California out a little bit right there. Remember, when we've had off and on La Nina episodes for the past few years, there were wet seasons that got missed in California because of that. With the Euro model and it's the way it's thinking, as I said, there might be more variability in the pattern there simply because we're not locked in to a La Nina episode. So that's kind of what the Euro model is suggesting through February. If we look at the NMME model, this is NOAA's model. So this is the most aggressive model in terms of bringing on a stronger and longer lasting La Nina event. So the impacts from a potential La Nina will show up more prevalently here in the NMME. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a death knell and it's going to happen. It's just the model responding to how it should respond if it's forecasting a La Nina. So for September, you've got the dry signal showing up across parts of the West and the Southwest. If we go to October, that dry signal is even more prevalent there, especially coming northward out of Mexico into western New Mexico, eastern Arizona, on up into Utah and Colorado. If we go to November, it's kind of tamped a little bit. The driest focus is farther to the south and southwest, and we start to moisten things up farther north from the Pacific Northwest, northern Rockies. If we go to December, it's even more tamped to the south. So the dry signal in September would really favor Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, and across the southern tier versus the farther north you go. I think, as I said, there'd be more pattern variability. We'd have more storms coming in from the west and northwest, and that would help to benefit things in terms of snowpack during that time. If we look at January, it's pretty similar to what we had with December, a little bit more focus across eastern Colorado, maybe western Kansas with some dryness. But certainly the tendency here with the NMME would be to be wet north, drier south. Those areas in the middle, again, you would have some variability in there. You wouldn't just be locked into one thing or another. You would have some movement there during the heart of winter. If we look at February, very similar. Okay, where you've got more active stuff across the northern tier and then emptying into the eastern Corn Belt and the Ohio Valley. And March, a little bit of a drier signal there in the southwest. But again, that's because the model is still lingering some La Nina-like conditions in that area. I will say this, even when you take the bias away, which that's what this model does right here, it kind of, the IRI multi-model probability forecast helps to take out some of the bias of the NMME. It still has some of that same flavor in there. And this is the August, September, October forecast. This will update here in just a couple of days. But again, it was not forecasting a very robust monsoon at all. You can see the dry signal favoring the west and southwest part of the country. And then if we go to October, November, December, it has pretty classical La Nina-like signature there with those real dry anomalies setting up across the southern tier with areas farther north not being locked into that simply because that's where the overall storm track would be running. So a couple of questions here that you might want to ask yourself. Say, well, if we don't see a full-blown La Nina episode, what are the odds of the southwest part of the country being drier than average? Even if we see a slight tip toward a La Nina episode, the thing that bugs me the most about this is that the Pacific Decadal Oscillation, or the PDO that I talk about so much, is still quite cold or negative. So with the state of the Pacific being cooler, all right, that allows the window of opportunity for even a weak La Nina to have a better chance to develop. And even if we don't technically get to La Nina thresholds as defined by NOAA, even if that equatorial region out there west of South America is just a little bit cooler than average, I think it stands good reason, not only just from common sense on my behalf, but looking at some modeling and also history, that there will be some La Nina like impacts over the Southwest United States. I'm more concerned about New Mexico, Texas, southern parts of California. That would make its way eastward in most of Arizona, far southern Utah, far southwest Colorado. I think maybe the dichotomy here would be northern Utah might be better than southern Utah. I think that's going to be the trend, that the farther north you go, your chances of actually having a better winter this year and having better snowpack this year is going to be better than areas farther south. And we still have a couple of months here to watch this and massage it before we have to make any hardcore decisions. That'll do a couple of things for us. That'll let us look at these ocean temperatures every single day. That'll give us 2 more months of modeling in here as well. And just seeing how things are set, it will let us be able to let the game come to us in a better fashion, to where we don't have to make that hard decision, at least right now. So we do have some time, but I'm optimistic in one regard, that some big controlling La Nina episode doesn't look like it's going to be the dominant feature. But I just simply can't turn my back on the fact that we have a cold PDO and we have the potential even a weak La Nina event. So with that in mind, if you guys have questions, please fire away.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I guess probably one thing I was just looking at as you was going through those. Obviously, we been in a neutral pattern, and that's kind of at least going to continue here for at least the foreseeable, probably month or two. Wouldn't you agree? That would probably stay more neutral before we really start, I guess, having a better idea of what kind of an impact, La Nina may or may not do. And I guess overall, I guess the overarching trend, at least for the near term, as guys are trying to, forecast, look at where they're at with their herds, kind of going into the fall. I mean, I guess everything's kind of pointing towards a little more, I guess, warmer and drier for the foreseeable time, correct?
Yes, especially the farther south you go. Okay. I because farther south and southeast you go, you're closer to the core of that ridge. And if you set that ridge right on top of you, you take a lot of that monsoon moisture and you pivot it around the ridge, or you just simply squash it farther south. I mean, the heat that's going to set up across New Mexico and West Texas has a shot to be record heat over the next couple of weeks. There are several days in there that are going to be 100 plus for those areas. And even on the periphery of that ridge, that heat is still going to be, an issue for us to contend with. And you tip the scale to the fact that we don't have a real solid, consistent monsoonal flow out of that, and your evaporation out of your vegetation is going to be higher than what it would be normally this time of year. Even if we're not seeing rain, we would at least see some clouds, to kind of quell the heat a little bit. And I think that that's what the damage that this ridge probably has the chance to do for some of us over the next couple of weeks. It's just a higher end anomaly that is setting up in a time of year when we should be going out of summer, not really flexing with the big time summer heat. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Just trying to, kind of help give people a little bit of some perspective there, just as, like say, kind of heading into fall. Yeah, you're kind of thinking, okay, we're on the downhill slide of the heat and stuff like that. So sounds like we might have to contend with that here for a little bit.
Yeah, I was having this conversation. I was in Great Bend, Kansas, and St. Francis, Kansas, the past couple of days, and I was telling folks, back in the spring, at least here in Colorado, things felt just behind. It was about 3 to 4 weeks behind in general, and I was having the same conversation with a couple of farmers just the other day, and I didn't even tell them, and they were just echoing kind of the same type of thing. You watch the vegetation, you watch how the animals were behaving, and so on and so forth during the springtime, and that kind of set the table. I think this is a good example of that, because this is a ridge that would be more akin to what we would see in July instead of maybe later in August. So I think the propensity for us to have some late season heat here continue over into the early fall, I think there's a higher chance of that happening than average. And I would be all in on that if we were actually had a good monsoonal flow that would sustain. But I think instead of that, we're probably going to be battling more on the hotter side of things and the drier side of things, at least in the near term, versus what we would on the average. I think that that's a safer play right now than going the opposite way, in my opinion.
Okay. No, that
Yep.
that makes sense. And then I guess one other thing I just want to touch on that you had kind of mentioned earlier in it is, you kind of get into a trend, be it wetter or drier, it kind of seems like that tends to hang on a little bit longer. And I know, a lot of guys kind of remember that multi-year La Nina that we had.
Yep.
El Nino short-lived really, now kind of here neutral. So I guess just looking to the future. I mean, if we don't really necessarily tip into, La Nina territory, I mean, even if we have some La Nina signals but stay mostly neutral, I mean, is that something that we would kind of maybe stay there for a little bit, or is it, more probable that we'd swing back towards El Nino next year? I guess kind of what does that do overall?
I think with the PDO staying negative or cold, okay. And remember, this is a decadal cycle that we've been in a cold or negative PDO for the past 25 years. So during that period of time, because the way the Pacific Ocean is stacked, La Ninas are not only more frequent, but they're longer lasting. So if I was, and again, we're talking way out there here, okay? But if I was a betting person and I was wanting to put some money on that, the odds of us flirting with a La Nina again next year are higher than going to an El Nino situation. So for the folks that I'm advising, and this is especially true here in the Western High Plains and even farther southwest, the safer play is to, again, not overextend yourself as though we're going to go right back into wetter times. I think that's probably a good play, at least right now. At least it's the safe play. If we can set up a better signal for a monsoon next year, simply because we're not tipped in El Nino or La Nina and that they're not governing that, I think that would go a long way into helping things out. So if we stay relatively neutral, okay, I think the odds of us skating through the wetter season on the better side of things are greater than where we would be, if we were full blown La Nina and we would have to come out of that. You see what I'm saying here?
Yeah.
I'm more optimistic about that, and I'm optimistic because the future of us going into an El Nino or a La Nina in 2025 is very undecided right now. Okay, I'll take that versus going into it completely decided that we're going to be locked into this. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I'm just so much more of a fan of us not having El Nino or La Nina to contend with because, first of all, there's a lot of misinformation out there about it. Everybody says, oh, El Nino's great for me, La Nina's bad. Not all the time. These events are different all the time, and especially by how strong or weak they are. So I think putting all our eggs in one basket to say El Nino is always good for us, that I think that's not a good idea. For us to be in neutral and not having either one of them governing us, I think that's where we want to be, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and even
Question.
that, I
Sorry.
mean, even in a neutral phase, I mean, it's still really, you can get yourself kind of locked into the haves and have-nots. I mean,
Of course.
just depending on where you're at, and yeah, it seems like it's hit or miss for sure.
It's really about statistics in my mind. If we're in a neutral phase, all right, our our prospects of the weather pattern being more variable are much greater than if we're locked into El Nino or La Nina. So it gives us a better shot to see things come through. And I hate to use the word normal, but on a more average type of a year instead of having these stupid extremes one way or another. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I was wanting to ask you when you mentioned that when we're in a neutral, you have more chances at more volatility in the weather. Historically, how long can we hang out in a neutral pattern? Does it usually not stay neutral very long? You go one way or the other, or can it hang out in neutral for quite a while?
It can, but the tell here is for me, and at least you look at the past 25 years, is that we haven't been neutral very long in any one of these periods. You know, we've seen several La Nina episodes in there. We've seen very few El Nino episodes in there. So the tip, at least as far as the Pacific Ocean is the more negative that PDO is, the greater prospects we're going to have of not hanging out neutral very long, but going back into even just weak La Nina conditions. It doesn't have to be a gangbusters event to have big impacts. You know what I mean? So I think in my advice to, and especially here farther east, is that I just simply said, look, until that ocean shows us something different, and given the high input costs that are going on right now, grain prices are low. You've got to really balance your sheet and not overextend yourself, because it's pretty easy to lose your butt right now with the way things are stacked. Okay. I think playing it safe on stuff like that is definitely the smarter thing. And I will also work the opposite way. If I see a clear cut signal that says, bam, you don't have anything to worry about, it's going to be wet, I'm totally going to say that too. But I am definitely not there right now with the way things are stacked. At least in the west and southwest part of the country.
Gotcha. You know, and most of the time, I mean, most of us deal out here in the West and concerned. You know, we spend a lot of time talking about the Pacific and the PDO. I was coming across the thing the other day, and I don't know if you know much or can elaborate on it, but an Atlantic Nina out that was potentially developing. I mean, what if any would something like that going over in the Atlantic, would that have any impact, you know, kind of into the US?
Short term, it helps to reduce the amount of potential hurricanes that would come off the west coast of Africa and potentially threaten the U.S.
Okay,
Does
just
that
because it
have
would cool.
correct? Yes. And not even necessarily, I mean, that water, the water temperatures out there are plenty warm, but it would prevent them from basically going off the charts and really having some high octane significant fuel across the whole basin. So the cooler we can keep that area, it's in the Gulf of Guinea, it's right there off the west coast of Africa. The more we keep that cooler, and not cool, don't misunderstand me, but cooler than average, the more that helps to limit potentially the amount of really active long track hurricanes that would impact the United States out there. In terms of the Western United, excuse me, the Western United States impact, sometimes the Atlantic Nino or Nina, okay, can help determine what happens in the Pacific. There's some research that shows if we go to full-blown Atlantic Nina, that is a tell that the Pacific wants to go to El Nino. All right. That didn't happen this last year. So again, I think the analysis there needs more work in terms of how that is going to directly impact the Pacific. But I do think it would, if nothing else, it would help maybe offset the hurricane season a little bit this year. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, it was just one of those deals, like one of those stories that kind of like popped by, and I was like, you know, always concerned more, you know, with the PDO, with the Pacific and everything going on there, and it just kind of caught me. So I was like, oh shit, I gotta ask Brian about it and see.
I think, and again, I haven't researched this, and I think there needs to be a lot more research on this. The El Nino that happened last year and into early this spring, it really behaved oddly. It didn't behave like a traditional El Nino should. Now, those ocean temperatures out there were warmer than average. There's no doubt about that. But in terms of the atmospheric response on how the typical pattern works, I mean, that drought that's ongoing in Mexico should have been fixed. The drought that's ongoing in southeast New Mexico and southwest Texas right now, historically speaking, if you are going to fix a drought during an El Nino, those areas are going to get fixed because the storm track is so active in that region during a typical El Nino. But that storm track showed up late to the party. It was short lived, and it just behaved kind of in a wonky fashion. And that's why I always tell folks, look, uh, every event is different. We can think we know what could potentially happen based on history, but that pattern, until it shows itself, is not it's always a guessing game to a certain degree about how that's going to play out. So this year, going into this season, you know, that subtropical influence or that southern branch of the jet stream, for all intents and purposes, is probably not going to be there. So you take that out of the equation right away, and immediately your tip should be toward a drier trend the farther south and southwest you go. Okay. And that's just dealing with all the evidence that we have in front of us. That isn't necessarily dealing with something that could change in the future. That's just dealing with the elements we have at hand.
Yeah. Yeah. And really, like, even just looking, back, I mean, even in the last year, I mean, outside of, that hurricane that came in off the Pacific, I mean, really outside of that, I mean, for the most part, was drier than normal for most places.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Other
Well,
questions?
yeah. Does anyone else? I just check the chat here, see if anything had come in. Looked like we had one here, and I don't know. I think we might have hit on it a little bit, but just kind of another one of those buzz things going around here is cloud seeding and the impact on potential increased precipitation amounts.
I think, there's definitely science to cloud seeding. All right. There's no way around that. The problem I have with cloud seeding and the response to cloud seeding and the overall impact that cloud seeding has is, where are you seeding those clouds? How far upstream are you seeding those clouds? There are a lot of counties in the United States that there's no way they're going to seed clouds. There's also the perception from, and I've dealt with farmers and ranchers alike that think this way, is that it quit raining ever since those planes started flying up around those clouds. Okay, perception's reality, and cloud seeding a lot of times will get a negative connotation to a lot of folks because of that. Or that cloud seeding caused this massive blizzard that killed all these cattle. Okay, believe me, I've heard it all when it comes to this. So my kind of pessimism on the cloud seeding front is that how far upstream are you going to seed these clouds for them to have an impact by the time that they get you? If you're seeding the clouds right overhead, you're benefiting your neighbor downstream. Okay, so I think that's what we have to look at there. And to be honest, there's maybe not in my lifetime, and I hope I live longer, but I can't see a regional massive cloud seeding effort that's going to take place. First of all, because it's expensive, and secondly, you're going to have everybody sign off on that because those planes are going to be invaded different airspace where they're not welcome. You see what I mean on that?
Yeah.
I do think there is science there. I have no doubt about it. I have friends that have worked in that industry, and I've seen it work, especially when it comes to hail suppression. But in terms of a mainstream fix for dryness or drought, no, I don't see that as an option.
Okay. Nope.
Yep.
No, it's just, yeah, like say it's one of those, the like super El Ninos or super La Nina, I mean, it's just buzz that kind of catches on, and we see that, and it's always like anything, good to be informed. You can't put your head in the sand. Looks like we had another one come in here. What analog years, if any, would you kind of be looking to as we head, into this fall?
None. Not yet.
Too
We're
early
not
to
there.
tell, right?
It is too early to tell. Simply because now, if we tip the scale in the next couple of months toward La Nina, that's going to make our analogs a whole lot easier to pinpoint. If we stay neutral, look, you could pluck every single new quote unquote neutral year out of history, and you're probably going to see more noise and chaos than you could ever want to see. And that's simply because it would be the El Nino or the La Nina wouldn't be governing the pattern. You would have other subtle things that are governing the pattern. Different, the Madden-Julian oscillation from the Indian Ocean. You would have different, all kinds of things that would be going on that would determine the pattern. So in terms of analogs, believe me, I'm looking almost every single day for little clues that I can pinpoint on that. And I do not have those yet at all. And to be honest, I'd be a fool if I even tried to put something out there right now, because the balance of this is pretty uncertain at this time. Okay.
Okay, nope, that makes sense. I know every year as we kind of head into the fall and trying to, analyze and look at things, I mean, like you said, every episode is different, but when you kind of look at the statistics and just trying to play it that way, those analog years are definitely helpful. But it seems like every
100%.
year, yeah, and it seems like every year, obviously the further we get into, that October, even November timeframe, lot more data available, kind of where we're sitting, and a little easier to start pinpointing some of those.
That's right. Those that know me, you'll hear me say this all the time. I love to let the game come to me unless I have to make a hard decision right now. The more data, the more information we can process before we have to make that hard decision, it just simply equips us with better knowledge to make a better decision. Yep.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I don't see any more chats in here. Yeah, I think I had everything here answered that I had wrote down, and I think everything that you kind of went through there. Yeah, I didn't have anything else.
Yeah. If something comes up, as always, that's why my contact info is there on the screen. So if somebody has a question or whatever that they think of, don't hesitate to please reach out to me.
Yeah, no, we appreciate that. And Kay, if you, I don't know if you had any other questions or that came up that struck you as we went through that.
No, no, thank you, Brian. We appreciate your time, and we look forward to hearing from what you learn here at our next webinar.
Yeah, yep. And that next webinar is going to be in October. So we'll have September off, and then October we'll have another update, and we'll be sending out some information to, people to sign up and get registered for that. And we'll kind of take a look back here in October, kind of see what where we came from now till then, and see what things are shaping up to look like as we head further into the fall.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks again, Brian. We sure appreciate it. Yeah, and thanks everyone else that tuned in, and we'll see you in October for the next one.
All right. Be well, guys. Thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
thanks.
Brian.
Mhm.